You've been scrolling through endless speaker lists, wondering which pair will actually sit nicely on your bookshelf, blend into the room, and give you the kind of sound you can trust for movies, music, and that occasional game night. The fear of splurging on a set that looks great on paper but turns out to be a constant source of disappointment is real, especially when you're trying to balance aesthetics, performance, and price. I felt the same way before I started looking into a pair of passive bookshelf speakers that promise a clean design without the visual clutter of oversized grills or blinking LEDs. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's talk about why the Acoustics Q Concept 30 caught my eye and, more importantly, why you might want to consider them for your own space. These are passive bookshelf speakers, which means you'll need an external amp or AV receiver to drive them, something that already filters out a chunk of the market that prefers plug-and-play solutions. That requirement can be a deal-breaker for someone who just wants to drop a speaker in and go, but it's also an opportunity to pair the speakers with gear you already own, or to upgrade gradually. If you already have a decent receiver and are looking for a pair that can sit on a mid-size shelf without dominating the room, they fit the bill. First off, the most obvious thing people notice is the quiet cabinet design. The panels are matte silver, and there's no visible venting that would let dust or stray light hit the drivers. In real life, that translates to a speaker that stays looking tidy even after a few months of use. I placed a pair on my living room bookshelf right next to a stack of novels, and the silver finish held up against the occasional spill of coffee without any unsightly fingerprints. That's a small but practical win for anyone who wants their audio gear to be as unobtrusive as the decor. Now, what does quiet cabinet mean for the sound? In my own setup, the Q Concept 30 delivered a surprisingly balanced mid-range that stayed clear even when I cranked up the volume for an action movie. The dialogue stayed intelligible, and the bass was present enough to feel the rumble of explosions without overwhelming the room. Because these are passive speakers, the amp you pair with them has a big impact. I used a modest 100-watt AV receiver that I already owned, and the speakers didn't demand any extra power to sound good. If you have a more powerful amp, you'll notice a little more punch in the low end, but you won't get distortion thanks to the well-damped cabinet. One practical strength that often gets overlooked in spec sheets is the lack of interference. Some bookshelf speakers can act like tiny antennas, picking up humming from nearby Wi-Fi routers or dimmer switches. The Q Concept 30's internal wiring and shielding appear to keep those unwanted noises at bay. In my apartment, where the router sits right next to the TV stand, the speakers stayed completely silent when the Wi-Fi was active, which is a relief for anyone who's ever heard that annoying high-pitched whine in otherwise quiet scenes. Let's talk about installation. Because they're passive, you'll need to run speaker wire from your amp to the bookshelf. That can be a hurdle if you're not comfortable with a little DIY, but it's also an opportunity to tidy up your wiring. I ran a simple 14-gauge cable behind the bookshelf and used a small cable clip to keep it neat. The speakers have standard binding posts, so you can use banana plugs or bare wire without any special adapters. If you're a first-time builder, this is as straightforward as it gets. No proprietary connectors, no hidden screws. Who should buy these? If you already have an AV receiver or a dedicated stereo amp and you're looking for a pair that can sit on a mid-size shelf without demanding a floor-standing footprint, the Q Concept 30 is a solid choice. They're also great for small to medium rooms where you want a clean aesthetic and enough performance to enjoy movies, streaming music, and occasional gaming. The silver finish blends nicely with modern decor, and the quiet cabinet means they won't attract dust or glare. Who should skip them? If you're hunting for an all-in-one solution that plugs straight into a TV or a laptop, you'll be disappointed. The need for an external amp adds cost and complexity that beginners often want to avoid. Also, if you have a very large living area or a dedicated home theater room, you'll likely need speakers with larger drivers or more aggressive bass response. The 5-inch mid/bass driver on the Q Concept 30 is perfectly sized for smaller spaces, but in a cavernous room it can feel a bit restrained. Now, for the hidden trade-offs. Because the design emphasizes a sleek, low-profile look, the speaker's internal volume is limited. That means the deepest bass frequencies are handled more by the amp and your room's acoustics than by the speaker alone. In practice, that isn't a huge problem for most listeners, but if you're an audiophile who expects